Senate Bill 1, or the Family Separation Bill, would force local enforcement agencies and almost all public employees to support the enforcement of federal immigration law. It passed out of the Senate on February 4th, and it's expected to be heard in the House within the next couple of weeks. This bill is harmful to the state of Kentucky. It targets primarily immigrant community as it increases racial profiling and put fellow Kentuckians at greater risk of deportation. It also interferes with students' education, separate families. It will impact county budgets as it exposes law enforcement agents to lawsuits in case of constitutional violations. It decreases in state and local taxes and depriving the state from a huge spending power. In 2010, when Arizona passed similar legislation, the SB 1070, a similar controversial legislation, it cost the state millions of dollars and decreased the immigrant population after the bill passed by 10 to 15%. According to data from the New York economy, 88.4% of undocumented immigrants in Kentucky out of work and ages 16 to 64. They pay more than $90 million each year in taxes, including nearly $40 million in state and local taxes, and hold $714 million in spending power that bolster the local economy. The cost of losing a significant portion of these workers could be substantial for Kentucky's economy. Okay, this is Amira Karaoud from Dark Star Production. We have with us today Ron Russell, an immigrant lawyer, to discuss Senate Bill 1 in the state of Kentucky. So, in the opening day of the legislative session back in January, the first bill to be filed was Senate Bill 1 by Senator Danny Carroll, replying to public safety issues per se. What should we know about SB1, Ron?
Well, one thing there's a couple of things that are important to know about SB1. You're right, it is the Senate's number one priority of all the legislation they want to pass. This is their number one priority. However, the legislation, as admitted to by Senator Carroll, who's the main sponsor of the bill, is to stop sanctuary cities and sanctuary policies. Yet he has admitted there are no sanctuary cities and no sanctuary policies in the state of Kentucky. So it appears that this bill doesn't have a purpose. However, they have also mentioned a couple of other reasons that they would like to see the bill passed. They're not, I guess, discussed as much. One is they say they want to stop drug and cartel activity that is increasing in the state. They didn't give any figures about that, but that's one of their goals, they said. Yet, the individuals that are coming into the United States with their children, they are in fact fleeing drug and cartel activity. I have interviewed hundreds of these individuals, and all of them are fleeing from a type of violence that could only be described as horrific and almost hard to describe. I've had people talk about the violence in their communities, and it's just shocking. It's unbelievable. And some of these acts of violence have been committed against family members, and in most cases, they're fleeing because of direct threats against them. That, if you don't pay an additional amount of income to us a month, then what we will do is we'll take your daughter and she'll be the girlfriend of the gang leader. Or we'll take your son and he'll be transporting drugs to all of the people that are on our list. So they're fleeing because they have to. They have no other choice. And I dare say that we would do the same thing if we were there. So they're not the cause of drug and cartel activity. In fact, they're probably more opposed to drug and cartel activity because of their own experiences than any of us would be. The other reason that they have given is they say they want to stop undocumented individuals from using social services for which they are not entitled. And that is a bogus argument as well. I've been practicing for 31 years, and I have never had a client charged with taking part in welfare fraud. Never has that happened. And so this is a bogus charge as well. These people are not claiming benefits for which they're not entitled. I think what they don't want to happen, they don't want their children who are U.S. citizens to be able to access, these benefits for which they are entitled.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the other part that puzzle me is that most of undocumented immigrant participate in the economy, particularly in Kentucky. I mean, most of them participate in the farming industry, particularly, and they are the revenues that comes, the tax revenues that comes from their workforce, they're taking part of their spending. I mean, I am not understanding who would benefit from this bill. So I'm not understanding who's backing it up and how it passed the Senate and where we're going from here.
Well, I think there's a political reason also behind this. I think there are people in the Senate who know that running on a policy of opposing, in their view, illegal immigration, as they call it, is going to be a winner. It's going to make some people think twice about voting for their opponent who may not have the same opinion. So I think it's a way to get more votes during election time. And I think it's that crass enough to get politicians to support the bill, because all the reasons they have given as to why we need this legislation are false.
But at the end of the day, I mean, it will only hurt the economy of Kentucky. I mean, there was Arizona bill a decade ago that passed, the SB 1070, and it's very similar to SB1. That should be an example for Kentucky. Looking at it, it cost the state millions of dollars, decline in tax revenues, national boycott, and legal fees for its violation to the Constitution. And that's the other part, is that it does violate the Constitution, given the right to agencies. I mean, I'm going to read here from the bill itself, Section 3. It says, all law enforcement officials, representatives, agents, employees of a law enforcement agency, and public officials, representatives, agents, and employees of a public agency shall use their best effort, considering available resources, to support the enforcement of federal immigration law. I mean, sounds to me that this bill will create an administrative nightmare, and it also is very vague. Like, it's what are they given a training to all these employees to act as ICE agents? Are they going to be taking extra work from ICE agents? What's the role of ICE then? Why are we having ICE?
Well, they are going to be engaged to one degree or another in assisting in the enforcement of immigration law. Agency employees, however, are not going to be involved in detaining, arresting, interrogating, or pursuit of individuals. That has been clarified in the amended bill. However, law enforcement officers who have absolutely no training in immigration law are going to be they're going to be requested to provide assistance in the enforcement of immigration law. And I think that is a very dangerous concept, because I think there will undoubtedly be violations of people's constitutional rights. I think there will be racial profiling, maybe religious profiling, certainly national profiling as well. And these officers are going to be asking to enforce a civil statute, not a criminal statute, a civil statute, which is the Immigration and Nationality Act, and they're not going to have any knowledge, for example, of how to determine whether someone is lawfully present in the United States. Immigration law is very complicated. It's the second most complicated area of any U.S. law. And yet, these untrained individuals are going to be asked to enforce immigration law. Now, when that has occurred under the 287G program of the Immigration Nationality Act, where officers are asked to assist ICE in enforcement of immigration law, they have been given considerable amount of training and education regarding enforcement of immigration law. However, in those jurisdictions where those agreements exist, there have been numerous constitutional violations. And as a result, these jurisdictions and the officers, the individual officers, have been sued, and significant awards have been awarded to the individual plaintiffs for violation of constitutional rights. So that's what's going to happen in the state of Kentucky as well, and even more so because there's no training whatsoever that's provided to these individuals.
So knowing that legally citizens of the U.S. are not required to carry citizenship documentation, and it's in fact illegal even to carry copies, right? Am I right on that?
Of naturalization
Yeah.
certificates, they cannot copy it.
Okay. So, and we know that there are elder people that they might not even have those documentation even at home, and I'm assuming that those people are at risk.
That's true. Citizens under our laws are not required to carry documentation of their citizenship. I have never done it, and you probably have never done it. It's just something that's not required. And there will be individuals who maybe try to go to a public agency and attempt to obtain a benefit for which they're entitled, and they could be interrogated about their immigration status. And if they don't have documentation to prove that they're a citizen or a permanent resident, or that they're lawfully present in the United States, for which there are many conditions that can produce that lawful presence, there could be a notation put in their file that this person is likely undocumented. It could be also because they don't speak English well. Or maybe they don't look like me. I'm a white person. They could be someone who's black or brown, or who has even dress that indicates they're from another country. So there's a lot of reasons that could lead an agency employee to put notations in their file because they can ask about it, and that notation could be there for a long time, and it could lead to something that would impact their ability to get benefits. It could lead to their being, information could go to ICE at some point. This is very dangerous. These people are not going to know how, even if a document is presented to them, they're not going to know how to determine whether that document means that they're lawfully present, even though it very well may mean that they're lawfully present. An officer or even an agency employee is not going to be able to make that determination.
And if they do take them and detain them, I mean, I want you to walk me through that process of what happens and what's. I mean, it's a very ambiguous also process that they can get lost in the system itself. So even if they have family members that they have their paper and then it can prove that they are legal to be in the U.S., they still might not take a few weeks or a few months, as a matter of fact, to be able to.
Well, there have been citizens and permanent residents who have been deported from the United States. And in some cases, it's individuals that may not be able to defend themselves sufficiently when they're charged with being here unlawfully. In other cases, documentation could be presented to an ICE officer, and maybe they think it's fraudulent or something. But generally, if someone, let's assume someone is undocumented, what generally will happen is the police officer who, let's say, maybe inquires and doesn't get a sufficient answer, will likely take the person to the local jail. They'll call ICE. ICE will maybe do a background check and then tell the person to, bring them in or something. Maybe they don't even have any information on the person in their records, but based on what the officer said, they think that the person is undocumented. So, maybe they would be asked to drive to Louisville, to the ICE office and present the person to ICE. And then that would start the process for determining whether or not they're going to get a bond, whether or not they're going to be released. The bond could be significant and they may not be able to pay that. They may not have an attorney they could access. They may not be able to get, a relative even who could, post a bond if that were possible. And some individuals will then be transported to Boone County, and, not long after that, they could be on a plane to their home country. It may take 2 or 3 weeks or more, but that would be the outcome.
I'm curious. You said Boone County. What's in Boone County? Is there something significant there with immigration, or just, that's where people disappear? Is that what?
Boone County is the detention center where individuals who are arrested by ICE in the state of Kentucky, not the only place, but it's a major detention facility for ICE detainees. And in this area, that's where they will go, to Boone County. And it's not an ICE facility, but it's a facility that is willing to set aside a certain number of beds for individuals that ICE want to detain there.
So going back to the enumeration of all the public agencies that are allowed to enforce the immigration law, this is definitely going to also affect shelters and victims of abuses as well, right? Most of them, they receive funding from the government.
Right.
Which means people that are there for protection will be harassed, basically. Also, I want to talk a little bit about also the Dreamers and how is public colleges and university will be affected as well, because that's also something that Senate Robert Stivers, when he was asked about SB1, if it would allow public colleges and university for undocumented immigrants to register, his answer was they should not be. So what's the status there?
Well, first of all, I think with agency employees, the extent of them enforcing immigration law is mainly that they're going to be collecting information on people. And that's something that's going to be encouraged, because if you do not allow it, you're considered to be encouraging a sanctuary policy. And that's something that the bill prohibits. So one can only assume that they're going to start collecting information on people's immigration status. They'll ask them questions, they'll put information in their file. And that could start the ball rolling down the road for, even detention at some point. With public colleges and universities, unless there's been some change that I'm unaware of, with public colleges and universities, they're going to be considered law enforcement officers under the law, under SB1, and they could, in fact, arrest, detain, interrogate individuals that are on campus that would come to their attention that they think would, qualify as being unlawfully present in the United States. Now, dreamers are not unlawfully present at this time, but it's very likely that the case that's going to be before the Supreme Court could rule that the not the enactment, but the executive action that was taken by the Obama administration was unlawful. And even though it's a use of prosecutorial discretion, which has been used by, ICE many, many years, and even during the Reagan administration, they used prosecutorial discretion to not arrest spouses who were granted amnesty under the amnesty program. So it's been used, in the past throughout our history. I still think that with the current Supreme Court, the executive action of the Obama administration could be eliminated, and dreamers could therefore be denied the protection that they have now. Right now, they're considered lawfully present, and that condition may be eliminated.
Yep. That sounds like there will be a lot of tension between the local and state government. Do you see that, and how do you see it impacting the bill going forward as it's discussed today?
Well, to the one point that you raised with any friction between local and state government, I know that would exist with domestic shelters for women who are trying to find a safe place from the abuse that they've suffered. Because what's going to happen is that individuals who suffer this kind of abuse are going to be afraid to call law enforcement. There might be someone else in their house who is undocumented. They might be worried that their children could be incarcerated as well. So they're going to be afraid to call the police and make a complaint about a domestic violence incident that has occurred. And so that's going to be on the rise. And those individuals who in the past would seek shelter are not going to be doing that because they're going to be afraid of contacting any agency. Even though in the law they've sort of excluded domestic violence shelters, that's not going to eliminate the fear, the overall fear that's going to exist in the immigrant community when it comes to any kind of law enforcement activity.
Can you cover the timeline? Where is the bill standing now? Where is it going to go? And what's going to happen for it to pass and actually become a law?
I can give you an approximate timeline, and when I say approximate, I mean very
Hopefully we'll
generous.
kill it before it gets there.
Right. Well, we've thought the bill might come before the Judiciary Committee the week before last, and last week, and this week. However, it's not going to be before the Judiciary Committee in the House this week. It's uncertain when it will come up. It will come up at some point. So it's probably fair to say within the next 2 or 3 weeks, it could be heard in the Judiciary Committee. And there'll be individuals who will be speaking to the committee regarding, their views of the bill. And probably most of them will be in opposition. There may be some in support of it as well. But after that, there could very well be a vote in the Judiciary Committee to amend it, to pass it, to defeat it. And if it is amended, then it would come back to the committee and be voted upon then. But if it passes the Judiciary Committee, then it would go to the entire House of Representatives and voted upon there. If it, let's say, is amended, then it has to go back to the Senate. And and the Senate has to agree or disagree with the amendment. If they agree with it, then it would go to the governor for his signature, and I think he has 10 days to pass it or veto it or not take any action, and then it would become law if he doesn't take any action.
And any idea about what Governor Andy Bashir position is about the bill?
Well, we're not certain. We think that the governor would veto the bill, but we have not, had a meeting yet with the governor about that. But we would expect that he would sincerely listen to concerns, and hopefully he would veto the bill because of the damage that it will do to the state of Kentucky. You were talking about some of the economic damage. It definitely will produce a negative consequence there that is really somewhat unknown as far as the gravity of the consequences. But rest assured, there's going to be a significant consequence economically, and there could be boycotts of the state as well, just like as you mentioned what happened in Arizona, and that could have a devastating impact on the economy. So hopefully the governor would listen to all that information and just the mean-spirited nature of this bill, which I think is to really create fear and confusion among the immigrants in our state, and also to promote fear of immigrants on the part of the majority population, the white population, and even beyond fear, even hatred. There's a lot of hatred towards non-majority groups in this country right now, religious, different nationalities, and I think this bill is going to, promote even more of those attitudes where these people feel unsafe in our state and in our country.
So what is the community doing today, and what call for action we can tell voters of Kentucky to do today to stop this bill to kill this bill before it goes anywhere?
Well, we're trying to speak to individuals in the community, going to churches, for example, synagogues, mosques, and talk to people about the negative aspects of this bill, and to encourage people to speak out against it, to get their organizations, for example, to sign on to letters in opposition to the bill, trying to get people to come to the committee meeting in which this bill will be heard, trying to get them to speak to their organizations that they belong to have those organizations speak out against the bill. We don't have a whole lot of time. We're probably looking at, 6 weeks at the most, and then there's going to be some action on it. And so it's very important for people to get involved now, because the consequences of this bill, it could last in our state for quite some time, maybe even a generation or more. And the lingering effects of it, even if it's at some point, repealed, the lingering mistrust and, anxiety that will exist as a result of it will be there for some time.
Should immigrants start worrying about it? What is it that they can do today? What are the things, what strategy they should plan if the bill get passed, and what can they do today?
Well, today I think, immigrants have a story to tell. Like, for example, at the hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee, there were some very, very compelling stories of people who have come up from the Golden Triangle, from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. And the stories were just very, very compelling. And I think those stories can give voice to these individuals who have come to this country not in any way to use it or abuse it, but come here to make a contribution and are significantly making contributions to our society. I mean, look at the Dreamers and the impact that they have had. Um, and look at all the jobs that a lot of U.S. workers don't want. You know, some of the more dangerous jobs like roofing, some of the more difficult jobs like, landscaping, um, even some factory jobs where, the labor is so difficult and intensive. People will have, serious injuries after working there for a while. These people are contributing to our society, and in almost all cases, they're paying taxes. They want to pay taxes. They want to find a way to pay taxes because they realize that, it can impact their future too. And so that's why there's an incentive for them to pay taxes. And they can't use any of the benefits that, we can access. So they're paying taxes without any of the benefits that, we take for granted.
So giving us money, basically.
Right. They're making the Social Security Administration solvent, because all the money that's going into the Social Security Administration. Some people have stated that it would be in much more serious financial disarray if it weren't for the undocumented workers that are, contributing so much and getting nothing out of it.
So who does really benefit from this bill? I mean, Kentucky has its many other issues, the miners losing their jobs, and it seems to me odd to make this bill a priority. I mean, it shouldn't be this the priority. It should be education, it should be healthcare, it should be trying to solve the issues, the economic issues and the poverty in the Appalachia. I mean, who is it benefit?
Well, I think the only people that it really benefits are the politicians who want to use it as a wedge issue to run on so that they can criticize their opponents for being soft on, in their mind, illegal immigration and, try to secure election. I mean, it's happening nationally. And, it's wouldn't be surprising that if, something like this is passed, that the real motives will be shown, in the future, because they'll run on maintaining the integrity of our immigration system through SB1, which does nothing to do that at all. Just creates, barriers for people to continue living their lives and making their contributions that they have done in our society.
And Kentuckians would be the ones paying the price.
Yes, all of us.
I didn't necessarily ask you the question of how it will cost local governments in terms of increasing the cost of detention.
Right. I can comment on it generally.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the cost to local governments and agencies of the state, I think the cost can be significant. You mentioned detention cost. I'm sure they will rise because local law enforcement officers will take these individuals and put them in detention in their local jails. They could be there for days before they would be able to even take them to ICE. Let's say if they arrest them on a Friday afternoon, they're not going to be able to even contact ICE until the following Monday. So that's, 2 or 3 days that they're going to be in detention in the local jail, and it's going to be those communities that are going to pay for that. Also, the requirements of agency employees to collect information on a person's immigration status is going to be significant. The only way that they could do this without racial profiling, without national profiling or religious profiling, is by collecting information on everyone who comes into the office. Otherwise, they're going to be susceptible to a charge of profiling. So if they start collecting it on everyone, that's going to be an administrative nightmare because, number one, as we mentioned, they're not going to have the documentation readily at hand in most cases. And so they're going to have to tell them to come back with documentation to prove their lawful status if they want this benefit. And they may try to, deny them a benefit if they don't come back, a benefit that they might be entitled to, but just afraid to pursue it further because, excuse me, what might happen to them or some member of their family. So this requirement to collect information on everyone's immigration status is going to be very onerous. It's going to take, additional work on the part of all these agency employees to collect this information. And what are they going to do with it when they get it? I mean, are they going to start calling ICE, with this information? And ICE doesn't necessarily want information on everyone they suspect who is here in undocumented status. They might call them at some point about someone. What information do you have on them? Have they tried to collect, public benefits before or whatever? But, it's going to be an administrative nightmare, I think, for a lot of these agencies.
And then there is also the cost of that is against this agency act, and if the person that they detained is actually illegal, that's unconstitutional. So there will be a lot of lawsuits involved as well.
Yeah, well, they won't be detaining people, the agency employees, but they could call a local government employee, local law enforcement officer. There's so many issues that could come up, like, for example, the requirement for officers to respond to a valid and legal request from ICE. What does that mean? What does a valid and legal request from ICE mean? So that's not defined in the law. I guess the officer has to make that determination as to whether or not this is a valid and legal request. And there's no guidance, no training whatsoever on that. You could have a rogue ICE officer who's, just wanting to detain someone because they're, well, for whatever reason. There could be an unlawful reason. And there's not going to be any checks or balances on that. They're not even going to write down if an ICE officer has called. There's no requirement of that. They just have to make a so-called valid and legal request of the law enforcement agency, to assist them in some manner, or a valid and legal request to the agency employee to provide information on this person, that person, whoever they want, and they have to do that. So that's stop their work and get the file and look at it, and the file might be, 2 inches thick, and they have to go through there and find out information on whether or not there's any notation about the person being in the United States unlawfully. So it's going to be a problematic law to even enforce, even with all the other negative things about it.
Do you want to add anything else?
Well, I would just like to say I think this bill is very misguided and reckless and will lead to lawsuits against local agencies, including local law enforcement agencies. They are primarily the ones who will be sued, I would suspect. And these local jurisdictions are not going to have money to pay these substantial settlements that will be awarded in some of these cases. So, it's not going to produce anything that's positive to the state of Kentucky. Economically, we're going to be very much hurt, but we're not going to be able to create this the type of Kentucky that we really want by enacting this bill and fulfilling all the requirements of this bill. It will create fear, anxiety, and grave concern in the immigrant community about, their friends, their neighbors, and even people in their own families. Because there's a lot of mixed families in the immigrant community too. So it's going to have a extremely negative impact, and it'll be an impact that could last for many years, even if the bill is repealed at some point. People are not going to want to come to Kentucky. You could have software engineers who are, documented, who do not want to come to a state where the atmosphere is one of fear and anxiety in the immigrant community. That is not a place where they would want to be. You could have professors who refuse to come here. Why would they want to come here? Well, if they've got options elsewhere,
right?
Why wouldn't they take that instead of coming to a state where, immigrants are, looked down upon in some pretty negative ways?
Yeah, someone that is treated properly somewhere else with an education, with a lot of skills that they can bring to the state, they definitely would not want to be here. They definitely want to be respected for what they bring to the state.
And not have to be worried about, am I going to get stopped by a police officer, because I look like I was born somewhere else.
Or I have a little accent.
Right.
He might be genius in physics, but he has a little accent, so he can't really afford to come here.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Ron, for taking the time. And
well, thank you for allowing us to have this conversation.
Yeah.
I think it's very important.
Yeah, let's hope that a lot of people take action and call their senators and, make sure that their senator listen to them, because voters are the one who can change things,
right,
not the way around.
And their representatives too.
Yep. If SB1 were signed into law and 10% of the state's undocumented population were to leave, Kentucky stands to lose more than $2 million in state and local taxes and more than $257 million in state GDP in just 1 year. Even if SB1 doesn't have the same legal implication as Arizona SB 1070, it would still create a similar hostile political climate that would encourage undocumented immigrants to leave Kentucky. Most of these workforce are employed in the farming industry and known to be the only practical workforce available for farming. This bill will have a deep, longer-lasting impact on the state culture, communities, and economies. Join us taking action to protect our immigrant neighbors and agricultural community. All you need to do is to call the number 1-800-372-7181 and ask to leave a message for the vice chair or the chair of the Judiciary Committee saying to vote no on SB1. And even if you're not resident of Kentucky, you can still call. The message will be sent to the House, the Senate, leaderships only, but you can still call. If you're using your social media, you can also use the hashtag StopSB1 or hashtag BastaSB1. The website that also help people to find their senators and representatives from their county is stopsb1.com. You can find more information on the bill and updates on it.
This podcast was brought to you by Darkstar TV. Created by Amira Karaoud, produced by Clayton Luce, and featuring attorney Ron Russell. Copyright 2020 by Darkstar Production Company, LLC, and freely distributable without additional permissions. For questions or comments, please email live@darkstar.tv.